Okay, so we're back. We're talking about the fire of the Father. The fire. It's the same fire, it's the same Greek word that he used with the Laodicean church that we just talked about. The remedy for their lukewarmness is to buy fire. To buy of me gold purified in fire. Come into the fire. It's the same Greek word he used in 1 Corinthians 3, where it said our works, all of us have to go before the judgment seat of Christ. And we will go and he will examine our works. And some works will be rewarded for eternity. And some works, remember they're works of obedience, not just works what you thought was good. Those works will be judged whether they were done on the foundation of Jesus Christ and they bring reward, or they will be literally burned up. They'll be judged by fire, same word. The fire tests it, it proves it, it purges what is unclean. So when we submit to fire, it requires self-judgment, and self-renunciation. What does that mean? Renunciation, giving up of title, giving up of control. That's what the fire will reveal. It'll reveal the part of us that self is in control, and he's wanting it back. He wants that brought under him. He's given you a free will, but he wants that free will now given under his will. Doesn't that make sense?
Yes.
Otherwise, he's a king without a kingdom, because nobody follows him. Or they only follow him when he does good things, and he's reduced to a sugar daddy. We only call on him when we need him. So we need something, so we call on him. No, he wants our will given to him and follow him wherever that is, no matter what. So, what does this process look like then? We've talked about the aspects and the attributes of the process, what God's responsibility is, what man's responsibility is. But what does it look like? And how and who are we to be sharing this process? Well, we didn't know it, very similar to Joseph. We had no idea when this experience happened what this would lead to and what was the purpose of it at the time. And this was 37 years ago. I was driving on a freeway. I was a relatively new Christian. And it was probably in 1976.
Or 77
77.
at the most. It was right in there.
I wish I'd taken down the date because, again, I didn't understand the significance of it at the time until now. But I'm driving on this highway, and there's 4 lanes on this highway. And I'm driving roughly 65 miles an hour, quite fast. It was at night. And I remember specifically I was in the second to the fast lane. And there was a car on this side of me, and there was a car on this side of me. As I'm driving at night, I go blind, completely blind. Now, I say before the Lord that is a true statement. This is not a dramatic statement. I went blind. He blinded me. And when I went blind, all of a sudden, a blue screen came on my vision. And it was, I call video blue. It's just a beautiful blue. And what happened was, I saw a dot appear. And the dot was in red. And it started like this. This is all blue, let's say. And the dot started here. And it appeared. And the next thing that happened is it went up. And then all of a sudden it turned and went way down here, and then went way up here, and hit a bullseye. And that bullseye was like an archery target, if anybody's ever shot archery. And you have all the different colors of the rings, and there was a bullseye. And it hit the bullseye. And then my vision came back.
I remember that.
And I'm when my vision came back, I freaked out because I didn't know if I'd been blind for 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds to get that graph that he drew. But all of us, I got afraid because I thought, my gosh, am I still in the lane I'm driving in? And I was still in the lane. I was protected. The cars were still there, and I didn't veer into those lanes. But I knew I'd had a vision. It did not come from man. It didn't come from a teaching I just got at church. It didn't come from anything like that. And I'm not one who gets a lot of visions. I've only had a couple visions in my entire Christian walk that were not just mind's eye visions, but true visions where my eyesight goes out. This was a blinding, and he gave that. And I knew it was significant. Just by virtue of the way it came, I knew it was significant. But I'm a brand new baby Christian. I know nothing. So I'm leaping for joy, and I come home and I said, BJ, I said, I had a real vision. I've only heard about people that have visions, but I had a real vision. She goes, well, what was it? And I drew it, and she said, well, what does it mean? I said, I don't have a clue. But I know it's important.
I knew it was from God because you were not given to supernatural kind of spiritual experiences like that.
Not at all. And so I'm going, Lord, I know that had to be you. What does that mean? And for a couple of days, I still kept asking him, what does it mean? What is it? I couldn't get it off my mind, as you can imagine. And about that time, there was a friend of ours that we had met that had a ministry, he and his wife, Paul and Bunty Collins. And they worked and trained pastors all over the world. And they were much older than us in the Lord, much more mature than us by far. And we heard that Paul was in town and that he was teaching at a local church at a midweek service. And it wasn't our church that we went to. And we said, well, let's go hear Paul. So we went to go hear Paul teach in this fairly small church. And I remember he was in a room that had a blackboard. I'll never forget that, had a blackboard. And he says, I want to teach you something today. I want to teach you about how God prepares a man or a woman to hit the mark that God has called them to hit. And he used the example of an arrow, on how God would use an arrow and prepare the arrow to be shot to hit its mark. And he goes up to the blackboard and he draws that vision on the blackboard. Now I'm coming out of my skin.
You were coming out of your skin.
I said, that's what I got. That's what I got. That's it. Well, he had my attention at that point. I was listening intently at the process he began to describe that would happen in this preparation of this arrow. And so God likens us to an arrow. And this is a beautiful arrow that's smooth and clean and has a beautiful shaft to it. And it's ready for use for the archer, to use it to hit its mark. Well, all through Scripture, the Bible talks about the arrows of God and how God will use arrows, and sometimes it's in judgment or whatever. But it's always used as an arrow. And they would use it the men would use it in battle. And so it was a weapon that was used. And so God was likening us to an arrow, the arrows of God, that He has designed and wants to design us as arrows to launch and hit our mark. There. Now, unfortunately, the part of the vision that I didn't like is the same part you don't like. Nobody likes it, and it'll clear a church if you're not careful. But I can't help it. It is His way. It's His way with every patriarch, and Jesus even demonstrated the same way in His own life. And that's this process here. We talked about debasing. Joseph, debased. Paul, debased before commissioning. But the debasing is where the instruction and the equipping takes place. The healing of the holes in the net. All that takes place here. This part right here is when we come to Christ. Oh, we're excited. We're cheerleaders for Jesus, aren't we? We can't stop this mouth. We tell everybody about new life. We got new life. We think we got new life. I'm ready. I used to think that. I'm ready. I met Jesus. And so I grow like an infant grows. I got diapers on, but I'm growing. And I can't get enough of it. I'm reading His Word, going to Bible college, I'm getting everything. And then all of a sudden at this point, right here, right there, He calls me to something deeper. And it's what I mentioned a few segments ago. He said to me, "Will you be my bondservant?" And I'm going, I don't even know what that word means. Bondservant. What's a bondservant? I'm a servant. I love Jesus. I tell everybody about Jesus. I go to church 6 days a week. Will you be my bondservant? And I knew there was a significance in Him asking that, as I mentioned on the last few segments ago. But as we discussed in the last few segments, a bondservant was one who voluntarily puts himself under the submission of a master, permanently, never to pull it back, and will only do what the master says to do and when to do it. That's his responsibility as the bondservant. But the master's responsibility is to care for, protect, and provide for that servant. That's the mutual relationship between the bondservant and the master. That's Jesus and us. We're to be bondservants to Jesus, just as He was to His Father. Didn't it say He did only that which He perceived His Father telling Him to do? Mm-hmm. Didn't Paul and James and they call themselves bondservants of Christ? They were bondservants. BJ read in a few segments ago that we're all called to be bondservants of Christ. Well, I met that day right here. And I couldn't answer it right away because I knew it was significant. I knew there was more cost there than what I was living. And it scared me a bit. Are you being called to that? If you are, you're right here. You'll never get there, by the way. Mark my words. You'll never hit that without that, because it's not designed to do it. You have to be equipped by Him. Mm-hmm. He knows what that means in your life. You don't have a clue what that means in your life. You're going to discover it. He's going to begin it in the Spirit here, and He's going to finish it there for your purpose here on earth. So, are you here? Or have you experienced that call to a deeper place, but you don't even really know what it means, and you need understanding of what this process looks like? What does it look like to prepare you for that? We're going to go over in the next segments now. We're going to take our time, and we're going to go over each of the things that take place there throughout this process. Many of them you'll relate to because you're already in process and don't even know it. Some of you are right there at that junction and you're being called into it, and you can expect this. But don't resist it. It's God. Don't say it's Satan because it's uncomfortable. No. Doesn't God chasten those who He loves?
Yes.
And if He doesn't chasten you, you're not one of His?
Yes.
Well, if we're not taught right, all the chastening, which is the correcting and discipline in our life that's needed, if we're not taught that, we go like that. It must be Satan, and we pray against it. And then we gather our friends to pray and help me. And God's going, come on, I'm trying to deal with something that is a sinful quality that I want, it's a spot, wrinkle, or blemish I want to purify. Don't resist my hand. That's what Israel kept doing in the first generation. So when we come back, it gets heavier yet. We start dealing with that. Okay? Please come back. We'll see you next time.